32 degrees. That's what it was the night Colt Mercer dragged a cracked wheelie bin down 3 blocks of West Oakland sidewalk at 11 p.m., alone, wearing a hoodie with a broken zipper, and nobody stopped to look twice. Not because they didn't see him. They did. But a tall 19-year-old with red-brown dreadlocks pulling a dumpster down the street in that part of town just looked like someone doing a job. Maybe a late pickup. Maybe a neighbor. Nobody asked. That part mattered later, when he figured out that the thing he built wouldn't just keep him warm, it would keep him invisible. He'd been sleeping in the doorway of a closed barbershop on 35th for about 6 weeks by that point. Had his spot dialed, knew which nights the owner's truck showed up early, knew when to move, knew the exact angle to position his sleeping bag so the overhang caught most of the rain. He'd gotten good at the doorway. The problem was the wind. The building sat at the end of a block that funneled everything straight off the bay, and by January, every gap in that hoodie felt like a knife. He'd wake up at 3 a.m. shaking, and that was it. No way back to sleep, just sit there and wait for the sky to get light enough to move around. The wheelie bin had been sitting outside a commercial property 2 blocks over for almost 3 weeks. He'd walked past it every day. Green lid cracked on the right side. The wheel housing on one corner was busted. It dragged when you tried to roll it. Somebody had spray painted a sun on the side in yellow. He doesn't know why that detail stuck with him, but he kept looking at it, not because he had a plan, just because he couldn't stop. The night he took it, he didn't have a plan. He just knew nobody was coming for it. He pulled it home. 3 blocks, the bad wheel dragging the whole way, sparking on the pavement cracks, and stood it upright in the narrow alley behind the barber shop. He stood there looking at it for a while. A wheelie bin is a box, already mostly weatherproof, already has walls and a lid. He went through the dimensions in his head. He's 6'1". The bin was maybe 48 inches tall, 24 wide. He wasn't going to fit inside it standing. That wasn't where his head was. The idea took about 4 days to arrive, and it came in pieces. The first piece came from the broken wheel housing. When the bin was upright, the damaged corner sat lower than the other 3. If you pressed down on the lid on that side, the whole thing tilted. Not enough to fall, just enough to shift. He was messing with it one afternoon when he noticed, if you removed the lid entirely and laid the bin on its back, the opening faced up like a trough, and if you then tipped it on the other side, the long side, the opening faced sideways, like a door, and the interior length of the bin lying on its long side was close to 5 feet. Not enough for his whole body, but enough for the part that mattered most, which was his chest, head, and shoulders. He lay down next to it in the alley, measured with his arm, head to sternum, about 24 inches, sternum to hip, another 20. He'd need 44 inches at minimum to get his core inside, out of the wind. The bin was longer than that. He started thinking. The second piece came from a broken pallet he found behind the grocery. 2 days later, 3 boards were still solid. He pulled them free, roughly an inch thick, 6 inches wide, close to 4 feet long. He spent an afternoon in the alley working out how the bin wanted to sit. On its long side, opening facing out, the base of the bin against the wall. It sat low, the opening maybe 18 inches off the ground. He could get in and out of that. What he needed was a way to close it. The lid was already off. He set it against the wall and looked at its shape, mostly flat, curved at the edges, hinge attachment on one long side. If he flipped it, the curve made a kind of lip. He started thinking about how to hang it back over the opening, not as a hinge, but as a flap. The pallet boards came in here. He wedged one board horizontally inside the bin, about 8 inches from the opening, using the bin's own interior ridges to hold it. The bins have horizontal ridges molded in for structural strength, and the board was just wide enough to jam in tight. He tested it. It held. That gave him something to hang the lid off. He used 2 lengths of paracord, one of those things you just carry, looped from the board, over the top edge of the bin, and around 2 attachment points on the lid. When he let it drop, the lid hung over the opening like a curtain. Not flush, not sealed, but covering most of it, enough to break the wind. He climbed in to test it. The inside of the bin smelled like plastic and old rain, dark, cramped. His feet stuck out past the opening by about 10 inches. But the wind was gone. The air inside was still. He lay there for a few minutes just noticing that, the air around his face being still. It was the first time in 6 weeks he'd had that. He stayed in for about 15 minutes that first time. Wasn't comfortable. The plastic was hard and cold, but the cold in there was different from the cold outside. Outside, cold moves. It finds you. In the bin, it was just sitting cold, the kind you can layer against. He came out thinking about insulation. The next morning, he went to the Goodwill on Telegraph. Had $4. Bought a long fleece blanket, one of the thin $1.50 and a pair of phone earplugs that were in the wrong packaging, priced at 25 cents. He didn't need them for sound. He wanted the foam. He tore them apart when he got back. The fleece went inside the bin, folded twice, laid the length of the interior. The foam strips he pushed into the gap at the top of the lid hang where the paracord looped over the edge, just to reduce the gap slightly. He slept in it that night, for the first time, pulled his sleeping bag in after him, got his torso fully inside, pulled the lid curtain down with one hand, feet out, knees almost out, but his chest and head were in, and the wind was hitting his feet and shins, and he didn't care, because his core was still and his face was still, and he slept until 6 a.m. without waking up once. He'd been waking up 3 or 4 times a night in the doorway. The next problem was moving it. He knew from the start that a fixed spot was only safe for so long. The city moved people. Officers came through. Other people on the street knew where your spot was, and that could go fine for months and then stop going fine. He needed the bin to move. The busted wheel housing was the issue. 3 wheels worked, 1 dragged. He'd gotten it 2 blocks on that damaged corner, and it was getting worse. He went back to the pallet. The remaining boards weren't useful as boards, but there were 3 metal brackets holding the slats to the frame. Simple L brackets, each held with 2 screws. He pulled them with a piece of rebar he used as a pry tool. 20 minutes. He didn't know yet what he'd do with them, but he took them. The broken wheel housing, the housing itself was intact. The caster wheel inside, a small, hard plastic wheel, maybe 3 inches across, had cracked through the center. The axle was still there, still attached, just spinning loose. He needed something round, roughly 3 inches across, hard enough to roll on pavement. He found it in a pile of trash. 2 days later, a jar lid. Metal from a large pickle jar around 3.5 inches across, slightly domed. He took one of the L brackets and bent it cold, by hand, using the corner of the concrete wall, into a rough U shape. He seated the lid into the U, bent the bracket tighter. It held the lid loosely, but it held it. He slid the U over the axle stub on the broken wheel housing and pressed it in. The jar lid spun on the axle. He set the bin down on all 4 corners, rolled it 3 feet. The jar lid scraped and rattled, but it moved. He rolled it 10 feet. Still moving, he took it down the length of the alley, 40 feet, the jar lid chattering the whole way. It held. Not quiet, not smooth, but it moved. He timed the breakdown that night for the first time. Sleeping bag inside, fleece folded, lid curtain in place. He wanted to know how fast he could go if he had to. He ran through it slow. Open lid curtain, pull sleeping bag out, fold bag over the top of the bin, stand bin upright, roll. Slow run, about 4 minutes. He did it again. By the 4th run, it was under 2. 2 minutes wasn't the goal. He kept thinking about the window between hearing footsteps and someone coming around the corner. In that alley, that window was about 30 seconds. Out before they turned the corner, you were just a person with a bin. Not out, you were someone they had to deal with. The sleeping bag was slowing him down. Too long to stuff, he stopped stuffing it, left it loose, balled over the top of the bin. That looked worse. A sleeping bag on top of a rolling bin is more conspicuous than he wanted. He thought about it, then left the bag inside the bin instead of pulling it out at all. If he had to move fast, he'd stand the bin up and roll it with the bag still inside. He could sort it out after. He timed that. Open the lid curtain, stand the bin up, roll. 9 seconds average. Under 30 every run. That's when he understood what he had. Not just a place to sleep, something that could be gone before anyone finished walking around a corner, and once it was moving, there was nothing left to show it had been there. The cold was still a problem. The bin held wind, but the plastic itself was cold, and that cold came through the fleece into his back and shoulders overnight. He'd held on to something he'd read once. Air is a better insulator than most materials, and insulation works because of the air it traps, not because of the material itself. He thought about that for a few days. He needed something between his body and the plastic that would hold air. He went through what he had. A foam sleeping pad was the obvious answer. He didn't have one. What he did have was a roll of bubble wrap he'd pulled out of a recycling bin outside a shipping store. About 8 feet, double layer, the large bubble kind. He cut it to 48 inches and laid it inside the bin under the fleece. Lay down on top of it. The bubbles compressed under his weight but didn't pop. The large bubble kind can take more pressure before they go. He pressed his palm down and held it. Most bubbles held. He slept on it that night. Woke once around 4 a.m. The bubbles had bunched from him, shifting. They do that. But the layer was still there under most of his back. The plastic floor never touched him directly. He went back to sleep until 6:30. By this point, he'd been working on the bin for 11 days. He hadn't told anyone, not because he was hiding it, just because there was nobody to tell. He knew some people from the area, people camping along the underpass 2 blocks over, people he saw at the church on Monday nights that did the free dinner. But the alley was his, the bin was his, and that was its own kind of fine. The next thing he wanted was a way to hook the lid curtain closed from inside. This sounds more complicated than it was. The paracord holding the lid curtain looped over the top edge of the bin and was tied to the board inside. When the curtain was down, it hung by gravity. Wind could push it open. Someone walking past could flip it. He wanted to hold it down from inside, something he could do lying flat, without tools. He thought about it for 2 days. The answer was a hook. Found a length of wire in the alley, maybe 18 inches. The rebar helped him bend it. A simple hook at one end, a loop at the other. He drove a screw into the interior wall of the bin. The plastic was soft enough that a screw, driven by hand using a quarter as a driver, went in slow, but went in about 4 inches below the top edge near the opening. He hung the hook's loop over the screw. The hook end dangled. He cut a small slit in the bottom edge of the lid curtain and slipped the hook through it. The curtain was now attached to the wall from inside. He pulled the curtain from outside. It resisted. He pulled harder. The slit widened. He reinforced it with 2 wraps of electrical tape. From inside, in the dark, lying flat, he could unhook it with one hand. He practiced it a few times without looking. It worked every time. He lay in there one evening, not to sleep, just to be in there, and thought about what he'd built. Still ugly from the outside, still a bin. The spray-painted yellow sun was still on the side. The jar lid wheel still rattled when it rolled. But lying inside on the bubble wrap and fleece with the sleeping bag over him, and the curtain hooked shut, it was the quietest, stillest place he'd found in months. Cars outside, voices sometimes, all of it distant. All of it on the other side of plastic. The inside was just him and the dark. He sorted the light gaps next. When the lid hung down, light came in along both sides. Not much. The alley was dark, but enough. He had a strip of foam cut from the bubble wrap backing that he pressed into the gap on both sides of the curtain. Light dropped to almost nothing. There was one night in February, maybe 6 weeks into using the bin, that he described later as the one where he stopped thinking of it as a temporary thing. It had rained hard the day before. The alley was wet, cold water sitting in a shallow pool along the base of the wall where the bin rested. He'd propped the bin up on 2 bricks, each about 3 inches thick, so the lower edge of the opening sat above the waterline. Getting in and out at that height was different, harder. He had to roll in from the side, which meant the edges of the sleeping bag got damp from the bricks. He was in by 9 p.m. The rain came again around 10. Inside the bin, he could hear it, heavy, loud, the kind that bounces off everything. He lay there listening. His face was dry. His chest was dry. The bubble wrap under him was holding. The curtain pulled in slightly at the bottom from the wind and the water. There was a small trickle coming through the left side gap where the foam had shifted, and he fixed that later by cutting a longer foam strip, but it was a trickle, not a stream. He reached up and adjusted the curtain hook tighter. The trickle slowed. He fell asleep to the rain. He woke at 7 a.m. Still raining. He lay there for a while and did the math in his head. He'd slept 10 hours, outside January, 38 degrees, and raining. He was on the ground, inside a bin, on top of 2 bricks, with bubble wrap and a $4 fleece and his sleeping bag. 10 hours. That was the night he stopped thinking of it as a workaround. The floor insulation was the thing he came back to most when he talked about the build later. People think the cold comes from the air around you. It does, partly. But most of what wakes you up at 3 a.m., the deep cold that gets into your lower back, comes from whatever surface you're lying on. Ground, concrete, pavement, plastic. It pulls heat out of your body from below, steadily the whole time you're still. You lose more heat lying on a cold surface than you lose from cold air around you, because the surface is always in contact, always conducting. Air you can push away with breath, and movement. You can't breathe away a cold floor. The bubble wrap worked because of the air in the bubbles. Each one is a sealed pocket of air that doesn't conduct heat. 2 layers of large bubble wrap under a folded fleece put roughly an inch of trapped air between his body and the plastic floor. That inch was the difference between waking at 3 a.m. and sleeping to 6:30. He told Davis that first, before anything else about the build. Not the curtain hook, not the jar lid wheel, not the bin orientation, the floor. Because without that, nothing else matters much. You fix the wind, and then you lose heat through the floor anyway. You're still up at 3 a.m., just not wet. He moved the bin 3 times in the first 2 months. Once because the barbershop owner started coming in earlier and he didn't want to be there for that conversation. Once because a group of men set up close by and nothing happened, but something felt off. He moved before it could become anything. Once because he found a better spot, a loading dock 3 blocks away, recessed 6 feet from the street, with a roof overhang that came down to 7 feet. The bin fit under it clean. The overhang handled rain he'd been ducking around for weeks. He moved in 1 roll, 3 blocks. The jar lid held. The loading dock became his spot for almost 4 months. By month 2, he'd added a few small things. A hook on the outside wall, same wire, same method, held his backpack strap when the bin was upright. When he stood it to roll, the bag came with it, hanging on the side. He didn't have to make 2 trips. A loop of paracord around the top lip on the far side from the opening gave him something to grip when he needed to pull the bin closer to the wall so the curtain reached right. He found a second piece of bubble wrap and doubled the floor layer. He went from waking with his lower back cold most nights to waking with it cold maybe once a week. He doesn't know the exact temperature difference, just that the cold he woke to stopped feeling like something that had come through him overnight, and started feeling more like the ordinary cold of the morning air, on the surface, not inside. Ventilation was the one thing he never solved well. By April, warmer nights, the inside of the bin got humid. His breath pooled. He tried leaving the bottom of the curtain slightly open, but that let in too much moving cold. He ended up cracking it 1 inch at the top on warm nights and keeping the bottom sealed. By morning, the inside was still damp. But he wasn't cold. You can test the basic principle yourself. Find something the size of a storage bin. A wardrobe box works. A large Rubbermaid tote. Lie down next to it and measure from your head to the top of your thigh. If that measurement is less than the interior length, your core fits. Hang something flexible over the opening. No gap at the bottom, 1 inch at the top. Lie in there for 10 minutes. Notice what happens to the air. Notice if it moves or sits. Try it, and report back what you feel in those first 2 minutes. The thing about Colt's setup that people his age weren't talking about, not in any guide, not on any resource aimed at people in his situation, was the way the bin didn't read as a shelter. Sleeping bags read homeless. Tents read homeless. Even a good cardboard stack reads homeless, the way the materials announce what they are. A wheelie bin against a loading dock wall reads like a wheelie bin against a loading dock wall. It doesn't ask a question. Nobody walking past stopped to answer one. He was in that dock for 4 months with no contact from the city about his sleeping spot. He talked to officers twice during that stretch, both times on the street, neither time about the bin. In month 3, he started talking to 2 other people around the dock about it, not because he was looking to share anything, but because they kept asking. One of them, Davis, 22, had been in Oakland about 8 months. Built his own version the same week. Found a blue commercial recycling bin outside an office building, slightly larger diameter than Colt's. A little shorter. His core measurement was smaller. 5'9", so the length worked. He had the same cold floor problem, went with cardboard instead of bubble wrap. 3 layers, rough side up for grip, held together with packing tape along the edges. He said the first cold night in it was the best sleep he'd had since he got to the city. His curtain was simpler. A heavy contractor trash bag, the thick black kind, doubled over and taped along the full width of the opening directly to the bin. Sealed better than paracord hang because it ran edge to edge with no side gaps. Slower to open in a hurry. He added a tier tab at the bottom center, just a folded piece of tape, so he could pull it free fast. They timed it. Once you knew where to grab, faster than a zipper. Renata, 23, had been at the dock longest. She watched them work on Davis's bin for 2 evenings and then said no. She had a layered tarp setup she'd been running for over a year, and she trusted it. She wasn't dismissing the bins. She asked good questions, thought the curtain hook was a solid idea. She just knew her system. That's the honest version of this. What you already know and trust is sometimes more valuable than something better on paper. The limits are worth saying flat. Rain without a roof overhang complicates the curtain. A hanging plastic curtain sheds rain when it's close to vertical, but any tilt in the opening, even slight, lets water pool. Colt had the alley overhang, then the dock. Without either, you need a secondary rain shield above the opening, another piece of sheeting angled out, and that adds to your setup and breakdown time. Still possible in under 30 seconds with practice, but it's a variable. He didn't hide that from Davis when Davis asked. Sound doesn't change in the bin. Traffic, voices, glass breaking, all of it comes through at close to full volume. The plastic absorbs nothing. Colt always slept through noise. He said it was never worse inside the bin than in the doorway, because in the doorway you were also cold, and cold plus noise is worse than noise alone. That's him specifically. It doesn't transfer automatically to everyone. He left the dock in June. A spot opened in a transitional housing program he'd been on the list for through a nonprofit that had been working the area. 7 months on the list, he took it. The bin stayed, he left it clean, fleece inside, bubble wrap folded underneath, curtain hooked closed. He didn't know if anyone would use it or if the city would haul it in the next sweep. He just left it the way he'd want to find something. Total cost? $4 for the fleece at Goodwill. Everything else, the bin, the jar lid, the pallet brackets, the wire hooks, the bubble wrap, the paracord, the electrical tape, the screw, found or already had, $0. Shelter that moved in under 30 seconds. 4 months in one spot with no incident. $4. That's the number.